John O'Keefe dedicated his professional life to public service. He was a hardworking, proud Boston police officer. But when you talk about the character of John O'Keefe, the conversation goes much further and much deeper than his work protecting and serving others. John was also the adoptive father of 2 young children who he raised for 8 years, his niece and nephew. John took the children in after his sister passed away from cancer and her husband died just 2 months later. But on January 29th, 2022, more tragedy struck for this family. John was found dead on the front lawn of a friend's home, covered in snow. His girlfriend, Karen Reed, was arrested and charged with his murder, and what has followed has been an epic battle inside and outside of the courtroom. Prosecutors trying to send Karen Reed away while the defense proclaims her innocence while pointing the finger straight back at police. Tonight, we are live from the courthouse for day 1 of this emotionally charged trial, where Karen Reed's supporters voiced their strong opinions outside the courthouse, while the attorneys did the same exact thing inside the courtroom. All this as we continue our investigation into the tragic death of Officer John O'Keefe. We are live in Dedham, Massachusetts tonight. Day 1 of the trial against Karen Reed. What a day, what a build-up to this moment. We've been watching what's been happening month after month, hearing after hearing, and now finally today, here we are in Dedham, Massachusetts. Karen Reed on trial for the murder of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. Let me start with this tonight, because I'm a former prosecutor, and it's not easy. It's not easy being a prosecutor. And the reason it's not easy is you carry the burden beyond any and all reasonable doubt. You have to prove the case. And I know sometimes we'll watch a case and we'll say, oh, this guy's getting convicted, or, oh, she's getting convicted for sure. Even when we say that, nothing is guaranteed, ever, because everything must be proven by prosecutors. So, for them, when there's issues in a case, when there are problems with the case from your side as opposed to the defense side, they become much, much larger, because you've got to erase all of that potential for reasonable doubt. Now, there is an advantage that prosecutors have, because they get to pick the cases that they want to try. If you have a case that doesn't have the evidence, you don't indict. If you indict a case and then something happens, you can dismiss it. So as a prosecutor, you go into a trial knowing that this is a case that you believe in, number one, and it's a case you believe you can win, number two. Because trust me, prosecutors don't like to lose. Prosecutors don't like to bring cases that they can't prove. As a matter of fact, they shouldn't bring cases they can't prove. It's unethical to do so. You can only bring cases that you believe you can win, that you have the evidence that proves your case. Then you've got to convince the jury. Now, here in Dedham, Massachusetts, Norfolk County, they have chosen the case against Karen Reed, and they have charged her with murder. So this is not a car accident case. This is a murder. This is someone who intended to kill John O'Keefe. That's their case that they have chosen. That's the case that they need to prove beyond any and all reasonable doubt. And the one thing we know about this case from watching all the pretrial hearings and the lead up to all of this is that there are issues. There are a lot of issues in this case. Again, I'm a former prosecutor. I know a really strong case when I see it, and I see a case that, okay, we've got some things that we need to overcome here. Because every little doubt like this before a trial, you put it in front of a jury, it suddenly grows inside that courtroom because of the challenge that they have. Now, one thing that happened here that I don't think prosecutors necessarily expected was the public reaction to their case. the outpouring of support for the woman they've accused of murder. Someone accused of murdering a police officer, a Boston police officer, a really good guy. And when you're a prosecutor and you're charging someone with murdering a police officer, you generally don't expect the public or any portion of the public to necessarily turn on you. But that's happened here. It absolutely has happened here. It doesn't mean that everyone in town or everyone in this county or everyone in this state believes Karen Read has been framed, but there's a lot of them, and they show up. And they were here today to greet Karen Read as she arrived for day one of her trial. Take a look. We have some video of the moment Karen Read arrives. And the supporters / protesters all dressed up in pink. They're meeting her. She's smiling. She's with her team. She's getting hugs from folks. There's Alan Jackson, her attorney, as they made this walk from where they have to park through the front steps. And as they're walking, it's almost like a canyon where there are people waiting on the sides just to wish her well. Again, this is someone accused of taking the life of a Boston police officer. But she is the one getting the support. She is the one getting the encouragement. And all those pink shirts you see, anyone wearing pink anywhere near this courthouse is supporting Karen Read. So this was it. This was the moment. And I think about what this moment is like for Karen Read with all the buildup. Now, as this trial begins, it's no longer in her hands. The rest of her life, the rest of her fate of her life is not in her hands anymore. It's not in the hands of her attorneys. It's not in the hands of the prosecutor. It's in the hands of the jury now. But let's get back to those supporters. They're here. They got to stay back away from the courthouse a little bit with their signs. But I went in to that sea of pink earlier today. Take a look.
All right, how are you?
Welcome to Boston.
Well, it's great to be here.
What do you think about the Karen Read trial, sir?
There are more people here at the beginning of this case than at the beginning of Johnny Depp's trial.
That's right.
That's the difference. I mean, right from the get-go, I've never seen a story or a case where there's been this much anticipation for the beginning. It's right there with Alec Murdaugh, O.J. Simpson, and those types of cases. But very interesting. I was here 23 years ago for another trial, and I didn't see any of you guys here for that one. There was a Dirk Granitor, but
kids.
Yeah.
There wasn't so much evidence.
What do you think about the buffer zone? They're pushing us back away from the stairs.
Well, they're just trying to keep everybody safe, I think, right? That's what they said, right? I've seen it in other cases. I saw it in the Derek Chauvin case. They had a big buffer zone.
200 feet?
It was more. It was more. It was actually more.
Well, that was.
Well, they're worried, so everyone's just being safe. That's all. But I'm in the middle of a sea of pink here that you can see, folks.
How long do you
I
think
took
the
my
trial
sign
will
off just
go,
for that
Vinnie?
picture right there.
6 weeks.
You think it'll go 6 weeks?
I think
all the
it'll
way?
go 6 weeks. I think
Okay.
it will. I think it will, especially since you're not doing full weeks. You got 2 half days. So the 2 half days make it a little bit longer.
What do you think of Karen's defense team?
Alan Jackson, I've covered him before when he was a prosecutor.
Okay.
Phil Spector,
Yeah.
the guy with the wild hair.
Oh, yeah.
He took him down. No, Alan's really good. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Then he represented that actor in Cape Cod. What's his name?
Oh, Kevin Spacey.
What's his name? Kevin
Spacey.
Spacey? Yeah, Kevin.
Yep.
I knew it was Spacey, but I was just joking. But yeah, so no, he's a good lawyer. I mean, traveling
he's
across the
phenomenal.
country. No, he's really good.
Harvey Weinstein too, right?
Did he prosecute that one? Oh, yeah. He just got overturned. All right.
Mr. Yannetti.
It was like a Q&A session, jumping in there, and I was recording them. They were recording me. Everyone's got a camera. Everyone's got a phone. It's the intensity here, unlike anything you normally see. It was a big day inside of this courtroom today as well. You can see what the courthouse looks like tonight. Lit up a little bit for us. It's getting dark. It's getting dark in Dedham tonight. But inside the courtroom today, day one.
And it's
stated repeatedly, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." The last that she saw Mr. O'Keefe, they had gotten into an argument before he had gotten out of the car in front of Fairview Road. He'll opine that around 12:45 in the morning, when the vehicle was in front of the residence on Fairview, that for some perceptible period of time, that vehicle travels over 60 feet in reverse at over approximately 24.2 miles per hour. Among the items that they locate is a sneaker. When Mr. O'Keefe is transported to the hospital, he's found to only have one sneaker on his feet. They find the other sneaker in that area of the body. They find various pieces of taillight. You'll hear testimony in regards to lacerations to the right back of his head. You'll hear testimony in regard to an initial sort of skull fracture that occurs to the back of his head, and then sort of a radiating skull fracture that goes throughout his skull, which then leads to subdural hemorrhage, or essentially bleeding on the brain, and then swelling of the brain, which then causes a condition called ecchymosis, which then sort of leads to the swelling of both of Mr. O'Keefe's eyes that was observed by the initial response. What I submit to you at that time, that second time, is that the only true and just verdict based on that is that the defendant, Karen Reed, is guilty of murder in the second degree.
Karen Reed was framed. You'll learn that right from the jump, Michael Proctor predetermined the outcome of this case. Never stepped foot inside the Albert home on January 29th, 2022. Never checked out whether there were any signs of struggle inside that home. He never called for crime scene technicians and other specialists to look for blood or other trace evidence within the home. He never asked Brian Albert for permission to go in the home. So how did Michael Proctor feel about her? To his friends, whom he trusted, and in text messages that he never thought would come into the hands of the defense in this case. Lead investigator, Trooper Michael Proctor, right from the start, called Karen Reed names you would reserve only for your worst enemies. He told his friends that he hoped that she would kill herself. He told his high school buddies that he was searching her phone for nude photos of Karen Reed. And he was disappointed he hadn't found any yet. That is the professional and unbiased investigator who was chosen to lead the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe.
She told me that she had to remember the bad times, which struck me as an odd comment to say, but I assumed since she was at the hospital that maybe she was medicated. But it just struck me as something odd. She said, "I don't think I'm ever gonna see you guys again." And I said, "Of course you will, we're friends."
Miss Reed was visibly upset. She kept saying, "This is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this." And she was very hysterical. She kept asking, "He's dead. Is he dead? Is he dead?"
What, if anything, did you note around Mr. O'Keefe's body as far as the condition of or disturbance of the snow around him?
I noticed that there were footprints and track marks around the body itself. There was none coming from the residence or the area. It was just right around the body itself.
And joining me now here outside the courthouse, Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson. Matt, you've been talking about this, and everything you described lived up to its billing today in the build-up to what's taking place here in Dedham.
Unlike anything that we have ever seen in our careers, right? You have a police officer that was murdered, according to the Commonwealth, and then you have supporters out front. And today, Vinnie, there was a lot more supporters than we've seen over the past couple hearings, you know. There was just a sea of pink, and then you have the sea of blue in front, which is the state police troopers keeping people back. And then inside, when she walks in, you know, they choose to park across the street. They could easily pull up in front of the courthouse.
No, they're not going to do that. They do that whole walk through the canyon and pay homage to the supporters and everything else. It's really an amazing scene because, again, you have to put it in perspective what we're talking about here and the allegations. So let's get to what happened in court today. Let's talk about the opening statements. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I mean, the first thing that I was looking at was the O'Keefe family that is just a couple feet away from the defense table where Karen Reed is. And at times you have Margaret, John O'Keefe's mom, she's wiping away tears. And that was just heartbreaking during all of this. I was looking at their expressions. John O'Keefe Sr. was next to his wife there. And then the opening statements, they were pretty much what we expected, right, Vinnie? I mean, you have the Commonwealth that is doubling down with their theory here that no one else but Karen Reed could have done this to John O'Keefe. And then you have, you're hearing the words conspiracy and being framed from the defense team.
Like, boom, this is she's been framed. I mean, he came right out with it.
Right, so let's take a look at that.
You'll hear the testimony from these firefighters, Timothy Nuttall, Anthony Flamati, Matthew Kelly, Francis Walsh, Katie McLaughlin, and Greg Woodbury. And at least from 3 of those firefighters, you'll hear testimony anticipates detailing statements that the defendant made to them when they had asked about the origination of some of those injuries. The defendant stated repeatedly, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
I thought that, you know, we didn't learn too much from the state's case, from the Commonwealth, in what they shared with us today, but I thought that there were some new and interesting things in the defense's case and what they're alleging with the corruption, including the lead investigator, and then the sexting or the naked pictures that he was looking for. I've not heard that before. So that's something that's going to be interesting to watch for, and also the cross. They said, watch for the cross in this case. But the jury, we now know more about the jury because Court TV team was inside that courtroom today, and the jury makeup is 17 people inside that box. That includes 10 women, Vinnie, and 7 men. And then ultimately it'll be the 12 that decide this case. And as you've already mentioned, you know, second-degree murder here in the Commonwealth. She's facing life behind bars with the possibility of parole if she's convicted of that.
Now, you know, 10 women. I'm looking at the sea of pink. It's a lot of women there. So it's not like men are supporting Karen Reed. There's a lot of women as well. So let's get back to the defense open. To me, different presence in the courtroom. You know, the prosecutors, like all business. Yannetti was kind of like, seemed like he's more orchestrating themes, more so than the prosecution was.
I thought that he was just so powerful and took command and drew attention from the get-go out the gate. And I think that that's what we expected from Yannetti. And I would imagine with Alan Jackson, we're going to expect the same fire. We've seen that in their hearings when they've been doing arguments for their client. But today we also learned a lot more about the victim, and that was really, really important because we know that he is a decorated officer that did so much for the community in Boston and the Canton area and outside. But then we also learned more about him. He was a car lover. He had classic cars. He took care of his niece and nephew and was their guardian after his sister died. That was one of the times that I saw Margaret tear up and wipe away tears. And it was
really heartbreaking watching the O'Keefes inside the courtroom.
It really was.
It was tough. I mean, that family has had so much tragedy. To lose a daughter, lose a son-in-law, then lose your son. And you know, the grandkids now have lost mom, dad, and then Uncle John, who became their dad.
And that's why I noticed that the family members that testified, and I thought that that was really key for the state, for the Commonwealth, to, you know, humanize the victim here and remember the victim. Because, you know, whether or not Karen Reed is convicted, he's the victim in all of this. They still have him lost, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
And so right out the gate, we're hearing from Brother Paul, and we're also hearing from his wife, Erin, and they're choking up when they're on the stand.
Yeah. So I thought that was a great opportunity to get to know John O'Keefe, because you don't want the victim to ever get lost in all of this. Now, the evidence also obviously going to be extremely important in this case.
The evidence in this case, and we're seeing that there's going to be a lot of forensics and digital forensics. We saw that in the Murdaugh trial, maybe with her car. We're going to see some of that. But then we're also going to see a lot of ring video and videos at the house. And today we got a clearer picture of some of that video of what the Commonwealth was sharing with us today, including this video out in front of his house there. You can see just the amount of snow there, but then you also have Karen Reed that's removing things from the house. And we don't quite know just yet what she was removing from the house, why that was so important right after his death.
But this is the morning of, right? Or the day of. The day of. So everyone's coming over the house. This is the driveway where you'll see the video of her backing out. Does she or does she not crash her tail light or crack her tail light in her own driveway?
And
or
that's
was it?
exactly what the defense is going to double down on, is the fact that that video that allegedly Karen Reed had access to, when she's backing up, she hits his car. They're going to show that the tire moves as John O'Keefe's SUV there, and they're going to say that that is how this car, the taillight, was cracked.
Unbelievable development of facts. Today's just day one. Matt Johnson, Court TV crime and justice correspondent. Great to have you here. Thanks so much. We've got a lot more coverage for you tonight, folks. We'll be bringing in guest after guest, expert after expert, giving you the whole story from Dedham, Massachusetts, day one of the Karen Reed murder trial. That's coming up. Plus, coming up next hour. In Dedham, Massachusetts, day one of the highly anticipated trial of Karen Reed. She's accused of murdering her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. We are live from the courthouse tonight.
She's accused of murdering a police officer, and she gets a hero's welcome here in Dedham, Massachusetts. Day one has begun.
We are underway in the trial of doomsday prophet Chad Daybell.
Prosecutors say they will seek the death penalty against him.
Investigators have recovered human remains at Chad Daybell's residence.
There's no way, Logan. I could never come up with this.
His wife, Lori Vallow Daybell, has already been convicted.
Now, will her husband end up with the same fate?
It's just so hard to know where the truth ends.
It's the doomsday prophet Chad Daybell on trial.
Hear about the variety of sort of injuries that she observed over Mr. O'Keefe's body from it. In particular, you'll hear testimony in regard to lacerations to the right back of his head. You'll hear testimony in regard to an initial sort of skull fracture that occurs to the back of his head, and then sort of a radiating skull fracture that goes throughout his skull, which then leads to subdural hemorrhage, or essentially bleeding on the brain, and then swelling in the brain, which then causes a condition called ecchymosis, which then sort of leads to the swelling of both of Mr. O'Keefe's eyes that was observed by the initial responders. You will hear various testimony about sort of issues in regard to his pancreas and how that's indicative of hypothermia.
What an important part of the case. Welcome back, folks. We are live in Dedham, Massachusetts, the courthouse behind me, day one of the Karen Reed murder trial. And that was the prosecutor in his opening statement describing some of the injuries sustained by the victim in this case, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Now, I say it's big because are those injuries consistent with someone being struck by a car going in reverse? Or is it consistent with someone being attacked, someone being ambushed? Because those are the two competing theories in this case. Prosecutors say it was the car backing up. Let's take a listen to John O'Keefe's brother who testified today. Tough day for him, but he stayed strong on the stand, was able to keep his composure. He also described what he saw when he went to go see his brother after all of this happened. Take a listen to his description.
You described to the jury sort of what you saw as far as your brother was concerned.
I mean, he was pretty banged up. He had his eyes had swelled up. He had a
breathing tube in, or the mask anyway. Blood come down his nose, blood come down his mouth. But what really stood out to me was, you know, the eyes. It was almost as if like there were ping pong balls under his eyelids. They were that swollen.
Now, in addition to what you observed as far as his eyes, what, if any, other sort of injuries did you observe on any other part of your brother's body?
I noticed some markings on his arm.
It's heartbreaking to have to describe your brother like that, your older brother, but he did it. This is important evidence, all these observations, but let's get some insight into some of this testimony and some of the facts that were talked about in opening statements today. Let's bring in our guests. Joining me here, Dr. Priya Banerjee, board-certified forensic pathologist, and Sarah Alcorn, private investigator, owner of Greystone Investigations, also the podcaster of Ivy League Murders. Great to have you both here tonight. Thank you so much here on the first day. Doctor, let me begin with you and talk about what was described here today, and you tell me what it means. Lacerations to the back of his head, skull fracture, and bleeding, swelling of the brain, swelling of the eyes. You heard Paul O'Keefe describe the eyes like the size of a ping pong ball. What does that tell you? What does that tell us about what happened to John O'Keefe?
So I think you really need to start at the back of the head. So to me, mechanistically, it means he fell back somehow, okay? And that's where he hit his head. And then from there, we have the skull fracture, and that impact is causing the sort of rattling of the brain and then bleeding on the delicate vessels that connect to the brain surface and around it. So that's why you get subdural between the membrane that covers the brain and the surface of the brain. And then finally, if you get skull fractures in the bowl that holds the brain in, the base of the brain, you then get, these are very delicate, like paper thin bones, and any impact or rattling like that can shatter them. And then you get that blood tracking down, obviously in areas where we don't normally find it, and then it looks horrific. We call them raccoon eyes. We know that there's trauma, and very significant trauma. Now, the question is further, how did that get there?
How did it get there?
Right.
What is it consistent with? So some of the other things that the prosecutor talked about, Sarah, today, was that 24 miles an hour in reverse, 62 feet.
Right.
Well, what do you think of that? Like, just like trying to understand 24 miles an hour, 62 feet, then striking. He said he was pushed back and then he's on the ground and he struck again, is the way it was described.
That would, I don't do car reconstruction. I'm a private investigator. I have worked on some, vehicular homicide cases. I think that is how I'd like to know kind of where that came from. What are the physics behind that? Because there has been an up jump in the charges in this case.
Oh yeah.
So was that the original reconstruction? Was that something that they redid? Where do those numbers come from exactly?
Well, to me, the 24. I mean, if you're doing a K turn where you're just kind of like turning around,
right?
That's not consistent with turning around. You don't turn around at 24 miles an hour for 62 feet. So this is like purposeful conduct seems to be what they're alleging here.
Absolutely, 60 feet. I mean,
that's a long time. And
it's not a big street either. If you really look at it, I mean, that is being some distance away and really at an accelerated rate. You are hitting the gas. And that does speak to me of some intentionality.
I want to take a listen to the defense now, because this is going to be a battle of an expert like Dr. Priya Banerjee. There's going to be one on each side, at least one on each side. David Yaneni here talking about their take on the injuries sustained by John O'Keefe.
You'll learn that he looked to have been attacked and beaten up. You'll learn that John O'Keefe was a large 6'2" man who, if positioned behind a Lexus SUV, would have had his torso completely exposed to the rear of that vehicle, including to the taillight. You'll learn that no part of his torso was injured. There was no bruising, no ridges, no scratches, no punctures. You'll learn that his chest and hips and legs were pristine, despite the Commonwealth's contention that he was hit by a 6,000-pound vehicle. The evidence will show that what was not pristine was his right arm. You will take one look at that arm, and you will conclude that a car did not cause those injuries. The injuries to John O'Keefe's arm appear to be consistent with scratch marks and claw marks, marks that make it look as though an animal had attacked his arm. But you won't have to rely just on your common sense when you look at those photos. You'll hear from an expert forensic pathologist who is world-renowned, who has personally conducted thousands of autopsies. And he will testify that those marks are consistent with scratch and claw marks and bite marks from an animal, including a German Shepherd. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, Brian Albert's family dog, Chloe, was a German Shepherd. You'll learn that Brian Albert has admitted that this dog is not good around strangers. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, John O'Keefe would have been a stranger.
Completely different take on what happened here. So, Dr. Priya Banerjee, let me ask you, the one thing they're talking about is where there aren't injuries, right?
Yes.
Hips, legs, pristine.
Yes.
How does that happen if you're struck by a car?
I think that's important. So they haven't spoken on the legs, or I haven't seen any injuries described. But really, you know, this comes down to like the accident reconstruction she was speaking of. But where does he's quite tall?
We're 6'2".
6'2", yes.
6'2", it's an SUV.
Right, so
Lexus
where does that,
SUV,
you know,
he's
we can
6'2".
do a reconstruction where that could potentially hit him if he's standing. Now, snow's on the ground, so I don't know how that would affect his height as well.
Well, like, no, when he's the snow doesn't fall until he's already on the ground, according to prosecutors.
So that's not elevating him any.
No, not at all.
So, you know, then you think about, well, did he get bumped and then fall back? But I don't see any bruising, and I think that's what they're getting at. There's nothing on the knees, the thighs, the torso, which is the upper body. So that's, again, very puzzling.
Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the challenges here for prosecutors, Sarah, is there's going to be two experts, one world-renowned, at least one world-renowned, I believe it's Dr. Michael Baden. Court TV viewers know him very, very well, with these differing opinions. But I think jurors are going to put on their common sense hat and say, you know what, he's 6'2", it's an SUV, where's he going to be injured, right?
Absolutely. I think in looking at the photographs, and Priya, you could probably speak to this more, what are these injuries? I mean, I think that's the whole game, really. I do think this report, you know, what his injuries are, is the whole game in this. Was he beaten up? Was he hit by an SUV? And really, I mean, that is.
I think when people think if you get struck by a car, I think they're going to expect more. And I think their expert has to explain why that wouldn't be if what the defense said turns out to be. Dr. Priya Banerjee, Sarah Alcorn, thank you so much. I know we'll see you again here at Outside the Corners, but great to have you here with us. When we come back, folks, we're going to talk about the other story. There's two stories in this trial. There's what's happening inside, obviously extremely important. The jury will tell us about that. When we come back, I'm going to tell you about what's happening outside the courthouse.
Sean Ellis, the Sean Ellis case of 1993. Trial 4. Watch Trial 4. 20 years later, Karen Reed.
Inside the courthouse is where the trial's taking place, and everyone has been waiting for this case to begin. Now, as you'll recall, during all the pretrial hearings, that courtroom was packed, absolutely filled with members of the public and a lot of supporters of Karen Reed. But now that the trial's actually started, they're not allowed inside the courtroom. They've got to be 200 feet away. So if you look down this street, you'll see some American flags and a lot of people wearing pink. That's as close as they can get with their signs and their buttons. Behind that cone is where they have to stay if you're wearing anything that says Karen Reed, if you've got a button, if you've got a sign. And the trial's already started. So as we get closer, you can see they're actually listening to what's taking place inside the courtroom right now. It's unreal. The folks who have been inside the courtroom in all the buildup, and no one ever goes to pretrial hearings, members of the public, a pretrial hearing, no, I'll wait for the trial. Now that the trial started, they moved to the small courtroom. There's no room for the public, so they're outside. So as the trial's going on inside, it was beginning, I took a few moments to speak to some of the folks in pink. Are you disappointed you're not in the courtroom?
Absolutely not. The courtroom is small, and it is in the best interest of Karen to have that courtroom, and I want the best for Karen. And I'm out here with the Free Karen Reed movement and the people that are standing for justice, and we are full of love and positivity for Karen, and so we're where we need to be.
I believe that she's been framed. I believe Officer John O'Keefe entered Boston police officer Brian Albert's home. There was a party, FBI saying at least 13 people in the house. We believe some sort of altercation turned into a melee and involved the homeowner's dog. And I believe that it was a conspiracy and that his body was placed on that front lawn sometime after 2:30 a.m. I believe almost immediately after he was assaulted, there was plans underway to place him outside. But I think the initial plan was to say he was hit by a plow. And then I think even the early morning investigation that involved the local police department, they were going with he was assaulted. You know, because Canton police, all they find is the broken clear glass. The taillight doesn't show up till 12 hours later at an undeclared and unsecured crime scene, which was the front lawn.
I come from a police family. I have 3 brothers who are police officers. My father was a chief. I have dated policemen. I've gone to after-hour parties. I know what it's like. I know what that blue line is all about. And I love that blue line, and I'm very, very proud of them. And I can't believe that they took their friend and put him in the snow. When I saw the autopsy picture, that's what sold me. Absolutely, a dog was in the house.
A couple things about the folks in pink. I mean, they know the case inside out. Like, they've been following each and every development, everything that's happened. So when you speak to them, you're speaking to people that know the case. Now, they're very skeptical of the prosecution, obviously. So to give you a little more of the local flavor, I have a couple guests joining us. Nick Rocco, who's a Karen Reed supporter, is with us, been on the show before. And Joseph Krowski, Jr., criminal defense attorney. Probably recognize him from Court TV. He has tried cases on Court TV. Great to have you both here. So, Nick, let me start with you. 200 feet away. You can bring the mic up a little closer. Any developments on getting your people and the folks closer? Is that still being litigated?
Yeah, so we're definitely still working on that. The United States Supreme Court of Massachusetts did deny the most recent motion we put in place. But we are going to try to move forward because some of the things that we had brought to their attention was basically tailoring this. And one of the things we had suggested was bringing the jurors through the back door and bringing them through a bus. And we found out today that's actually what they did.
That's what they did.
Right. So why do we need...
Where do you guys want to be? Like right behind us where we are here?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, even if we were on the registry steps here, you know, they don't want to...
No, you're not getting this spot. This is our spot. This is our... You don't get this spot. This is ours. Joseph, let me ask you. You've been testifying, I mean, trying cases here for years.
25 years.
What do you think of all this that's happening here?
Look, let me make one quick correction. Just so your audience is clear. Every single person out here is entitled to be in that courtroom. They just can't bring their signs, their pins, their buttons with them.
Absolutely.
This is an open and public trial.
But there's no room for them in the
There's
courtroom.
not room for them because they had to logistically move from a larger courtroom to a smaller courtroom to accommodate the jurors being able to see the witnesses. But just to be clear, this is an open and public trial. Look, I've seen a lot of things.
Right.
I've never seen anything like this. This case never ceases to amaze me. The way that this case has been aggressively litigated in the court of public opinion, The vitriol on both sides of this case.
Both sides.
It's generated an almost circus-like atmosphere out here. But that's in stark contrast to what took place today. Today, finally, they got in that courtroom. They closed the door behind them, and they started to get it on. Sigh of relief, I think, from a lot of people.
So, Nick, what is... You can't get in the courtroom, right? Folks are watching outside. They're watching different places. Is it a disappointment to not be able to be there since everyone is so invested in all this?
Well, I don't think it's that we can't be there. I think
there's not room for you, Nick. Well, there's no room for you. Trust me. I can't get in there. There wasn't room for me today either.
So
I get in.
Oh,
did you get in?
Yeah, of course you got in.
So
listen to the accent.
I will say, I'm sure I'll be in there.
Who's going to keep him out?
I'll be in there 1 or 2 days. But what I will say is, no matter if we're inside that courtroom or outside that courtroom, the Reed family knows that they have 100% support of every single one of us. You don't really have opposing people out here. Did you see? I didn't see anybody today. Nobody. And it's been that way since the beginning. You know, we're here, we show our support, and if people want to counter-protest, they're more than welcome to, but they can't, you know, we're fighting for their rights as well. If someone wants to counter-protest, they can't come within the 200 feet of the court. So what we're doing is ultimately fighting for them as well, to be out here and voice your opinion, because the First Amendment in Massachusetts and in America is important. You got to keep fighting for that.
Yeah, I think everyone respects that right, the right to assemble, the right to peacefully protest, but it's a balancing act, isn't it? Judge Cannone has to make sure the protesters don't inject themselves into the trial. The last thing anyone wants to do is 2 weeks into this have to declare a mistrial because a juror heard something he or she shouldn't have heard. A juror or a witness was intimidated. I'm not accusing anyone of doing that yet, but Judge Cannone has to make sure that this case is tried inside the four walls of that courtroom. Again, I was in there today, and she gave 2 preliminary charges warning jurors to disregard anything they see or hear because, look, it's the elephant in the room. We know there's outside influence.
It's like that in every case. They have to self-report. They have to self-report. If their spouse says something, if they happen to turn on the television, if they hear something pops on social media, they got to report it.
It's a lot harder to do when you have 250 people in pink shirts holding signs, waving American flags, though, isn't it? And look, no one's saying they can't do it. Just saying that the case has to be tried in the courtroom. I've had cases not quite like this, but similar to this, and it's something that both sides always worry about. Outside influences on the trial.
All right, we're out of time for tonight, but both of you guys will be back. All right,
Vinnie.
Joseph Crowley Jr., Nick Rocco, appreciate it.